head coach and coach of the year in the NFL, Joe Gibbs and Washington Redskins.
Joe Gibbs. You might know him.
And man, I gotta tell you, I love to win.
Hall of Famer.
I could have shut my eyes, pointed, called a play, and it would have been 8 yards.
The only coach to win 3 Super Bowls with 3 different starting quarterbacks.
Joe Gibbs, the NFL Coach of the Year in his second season.
The maestro behind some of the greatest moments in franchise history.
Touchdown, Washington Redskins.
What Joe Gibbs did when he got to Washington is well known. But what did it take to get him to join the Burgundy and Gold in the first place? This is Hail Tales, Stories from Washington Football History, Episode 3, The Hiring of Joe Gibbs. It's the 1980 season, San Diego, California. The Chargers have established themselves as one of the best teams in football. Their offense is a force. Top 5 in the league in total points, leading the NFL in passing yards, first in yards per game.
My name's Dan Fouts. I played for the San Diego Chargers for 15 years, and during that time, I was fortunate to have Joe Gibbs as my offensive coordinator.
Future Hall of Famer Fouts is on fire in 1980. The Air Coryell offense, which put heavy emphasis on the passing game, is working big time. Chargers offensive coordinator Joe Gibbs really helps it flourish.
Joe was really a very detail-oriented coordinator, but he liked to have fun too. And that was really the theme that Coryell tried to establish with our team, that we would work hard, we would pay attention to the details, but we'd also have fun. And once the offense was established, it just grew and grew exponentially, and Joe was a big part of that.
In San Diego, Fouts could see that his OC was a unique kind of talent.
I think the biggest thing about Joe is that almost to a fault, he was stubborn as far as which plays he wanted to run and when he wanted to run them, especially in crunch time. There are many times where I would get frustrated with him because the plays seemed like he had a different idea than I had, but his idea was always better than mine and always more successful.
During his 2 seasons with the Chargers, Gibbs helped San Diego win 24 games. He was a great coach, a great leader, and all that had the Chargers players suspecting he wouldn't be around for much longer.
What happened? I mean, Joe was so successful with us that we knew that he would become a head coach at some point.
Though others may have seen it clear as day, Gibbs himself had his doubts.
I got all the way up to 40 years old, interviewed at 2 colleges, had a chance to interview there. Both of them went in a different direction. So I really, at about 40 years old, I said, this may not happen. I think this may pass me by.
Okay, so that's what's happening in San Diego. Now let's take a trip across the country to the nation's capital, where it could be said that football happenings are not quite as sunny at that time. For the same stint Joe Gibbs is in San Diego, General Manager Bobby Beathard and head coach Jack Pardee are working together in Washington.
Beathard and Jack Pardee sort of clashed. They were of a different mind.
Len Shapiro, who wrote for the Washington Post from 1969 to 2010.
Pardee was sort of old school, a George Allen guy. Also one of the guys that Allen brought in when he was over the hill to play linebacker, and he was over the hill and did play linebacker and retired after the 72 season and became a coach. But Beathard wasn't going to work with Pardee and the Redskins, and Beathard fired him.
That same 1980 season, the Chargers are flying high. The Jack Pardee-led Burgundy and Gold goes 6-10. which would actually end up being the team's only double-digit losing season between 1964 and 1992.
Jack Pardee was a great coach, but very loyal to his players. But my dad understood something's got to change here. We got to get younger. This was a very old team.
Bobby Beathard's son, Jeff, who's been an NFL scout for a number of years. His dad felt it was time to go in a different direction. And the general manager knows exactly who he wants to be his next head coach.
Dad had a great conviction about Joe Gibbs' mind as a, more up-to-date offense and loved the balance of the passing and running attack. It was either Joe Gibbs or nothing.
Team owner Jack Kent Cooke wasn't quite on the same page, as Washington football journalist Mike Richmond recalls.
But the first time that Beathard mentioned it to him, Cooke said, "Who in the hell is Joe Gibbs?"
Bobby Beathard had a keen eye for talent, though, and he saw that Joe Gibbs was special. He was a competitor.
People used to ask me, what was Joe Gibbs like? I said, the only thing I know about Joe Gibbs, if you're going to play him in anything, racquetball or tennis or football, you better bring your lunch because it's going to take a long time.
He was smart and focused.
He was known for his preparation, tremendous preparation for games, halftime adjustments, etc.
Joe Gibbs was committed to being the best.
Joe was a workaholic. He didn't mind working.
And despite any inkling of doubt Gibbs himself might have had, being a head coach was in his future. January 11th, 1981, the AFC Championship game. The Chargers lose to the Raiders. It's after the game, and Joe Gibbs is with his family.
I had Pat, and I think the boys, and we were headed home, and there was a pizza place that we loved, and we had pulled off there and grabbed a pizza, and I get a phone call, and it was from Bobby Beathard. And it was one of the greatest phone calls, anyone could ever get. And he said, "Hey, would you like to interview with Mr. Cooke to have a chance to be the head coach?" And he said, "Can you meet me in LA tonight?" And I said, "Absolutely." And so I took Pat and the boys home, and I hit the road for LA, and I met Bobby up there at the hotel, and he said, "Okay," he said, "tomorrow morning we got a flight, and we're going to fly to New York to meet Mr. Cooke. And so he wants to interview you up there." I said, "Great." I remember went to bed. There was a fire alarm in the middle of the night. They emptied everybody out on the street. I didn't care. I was so wound up about things. And so Bobby and I flew to New York the next day. And that's where I had a chance to meet Mr. Cooke for the first time. And I still remember Bobby, always dressed casual, never had a tie. Well, I'm going in for this interview. And I told him, I said, "Hey, get a tie. What are you doing?" I said, "You're going to cost me a chance to get this job." And I think he ran around in the gift store in this hotel and the Waldorf, and he gets a tie. And so we go up to whatever floor it was to meet with Mr. Cooke. So that's kind of how all that took place. And that night and that interview was something I'll never forget. There were so many different parts to it. I think what had happened, I think Mr. Cooke, being as sharp as he was, had somebody write an article, and he kind of leaked my name out. And they wrote this article on me, and I think he wanted to see what the city would say. Here's a guy that's never had a head coaching job. And so Mr. Cooke was really smart that way.
A first ever NFL head coaching interview no doubt comes with some nerves. But Jack Kent Cooke had a way of turning it up a notch.
Mr. Cooke, about 15 minutes into this conversation with him, I always remember this. He goes, Joe, he said, that's my building right there. And he pointed to the Chrysler building. Here I am with this tablet talking about, Mickey Mouse stuff probably to him. And this man owns the building sitting next to us. I never felt so intimidated in all my life. The other thing that happened in that conversation, so he was reading that article that they had written on me. Okay, so he's reading this article, and somewhere in there, somebody had put genius on offense in this article. And so he's reading this paper, and all of a sudden he goes like this. He dropped the paper, and he goes, there's only been 2 in history, and neither one of them were in football. And he put the paper back up, and he kept reading this article. And so I had no idea if he was serious about me. I really didn't. And somewhere in there, that conversation, after about 30 minutes, he said, now this is what we're going to do. He went like that. And I went, oh my gosh, he may give me this job. And so I also remember at the end of that conversation, I can remember he said, okay, here's what we're going to do. I want to know, what do you want me to do? And I said, Mr. Cook, I got 8 names on this list right here of assistant coaches. And some of them have real good jobs in the NFL. I don't know how many of these we'll get. And I swear to you, he went just like this. We'll get every single one of them.
Bobby Beathard would go on to crush that task and made sure Gibbs got his guys.
When I went to the Senior Bowl that year, Bobby approached me.
Dan Henning, then the quarterback's coach in Miami. Him and Gibbs go way back. Henning is in.
The big thing about it was the friendship between Joe and I, and we didn't even talk money.
Don Bro, running backs coach and later offensive coordinator, comes on board.
I just had confidence in him, and it was a no-brainer, really.
Back in the boardroom, the contract is signed. Gibbs becomes Washington's new head coach.
I remember the financial part of it. He said, I'm going to give you a 3-year contract. I didn't even remember what he said on money. I didn't care. And from that point, I honestly don't think I slept for 2 days. I was so wound up, and I was going to the Senior Bowl to talk to those coaches. And so I was on such a high that, it's one of the greatest feelings. And I can remember, too, with Pat, the thing that meant a lot to me, Pat was always there, always the one. When we moved, she was always behind me, supporting me. And all those different moves to colleges and everything, chasing all this stuff, she was the mainstay for our family, taking care of the boys. And I was calling her right before I interviewed. I called her, and she goes, there's something weird going on. I said, what? She goes, there's a guy parked out front of our house. And it was a newspaper person that had gone up to the door and asked her. And she goes, I'm not talking to anybody. She shut the door. And she goes, he's sitting in the car out in front of our house. There were things like that going on. And so it was one of the greatest thrills. Like I said, I don't know whether I was really that happy or that scared about what I was getting ready to do.
Washington players were eager to get started with Gibbs, former kicker Mark Mosley recalls.
We immediately knew that we had an opportunity to do something that we had never done here in Washington since we had been there. And actually, even when Coach Allen was here, it was mostly defense. Our offense was just secondary. But now we knew that the offense was going to take over the lead, and we were going to have to really get busy and get ready for something exciting.
An offensive coach with Gibbs' specific mentality Quarterback Joe Theismann was chomping at the bit to get this new era started.
I was excited because Joe Gibbs came from the San Diego Chargers, and they threw the ball all over the place. I'm thinking, man, this is a quarterback's dream. Coach Gibbs is bringing the system from San Diego here, Don Coryell's system, throw it around all over the place, and I was really excited.
That excitement about the football that could be played under Gibbs is seriously tested as the 1981 season gets underway. Washington loses its first 5 games.
I used to sit with Joe on the plane, and he turned to me in the middle of the flight and he says, I may be the first coach to be fired never having won a game as a head coach in the NFL.
And there was a very famous meeting at Jack Kent Cooke's estate out in Middleburg, Virginia, about 30 miles from the facility, where Gibbs and Beathard were both summoned, and both were summoned thinking, 0-5, we're out of here. He's going to, because it's Jack Kent Cooke, who had sort of a mercurial reputation to begin with. But to his great credit, Cooke brought them out there, told them he was very disappointed in the start. What could he do to help them out? What did they need? What was missing? Stay the course. I like what you're doing. I think you're on the right track. Anything I can do to help, I'll do. If you need players, we can make whatever you want. Money was not an object.
That wasn't the only course-changing, history-defining conversation that Gibbs had after the 5th straight loss.
I get word that I'm going to get benched. Basically, I thought I was going to get cut or traded. And the position was important to me. I'd started since 78. So 78, 79, 80, John retires. We wind up in a 6-10 season. 81, Joe comes in. We start 0-5. He wants his people. I'm not his. He inherited me, so I wasn't his. So I drove to his house. I drove to his house after we lost to San Francisco, after the game. Now, keep in mind, Coach Gibbs was, you can't even use the term workaholic. He was beyond that. Whatever that description is, he's beyond it. Slept at Redskin Park 3 nights a week. I mean, the man was, at the end of the week, he was exhausted. So here I come strolling up to the house after we lose on Sunday, and I knock on the door. And he opens the door, and he looks at me like, what in heaven's name are you doing here? I said, Coach, we need to talk. We sat down and we visited, and I said, Coach, I get the sense that, I'm your quarterback, but I'm really not. It's like you really don't want me to be the quarterback. Anytime anybody can relate to this that's in a meeting when it's going on, and you get the sense that the person in charge is talking to people, and it's not you, even though I was the starting quarterback. And he said, Joe, look, you got restaurants, TV shows, radio shows, you got all this stuff going on in Washington. He said, I want a person that's just going to be a quarterback. I said, I'll get rid of everything. To prove to you that I want to be your quarterback, I'll get rid of everything. But give me a chance before we do that. And from that day, the next 11 games, we went 8-3, 12-1, 16-3, 11-5, I believe.
And Joe realized that he couldn't take that San Diego offense and make it work here.
Then linebacker coach and co-defensive coordinator Larry Peccatello.
So he deserves more credit for this than he ever will get or ever got. And that was the fact that he said, stop right now. We're going back to roots, basic fundamentals. We let go a lot of guys that we kept because they had promise, but they didn't have any production. And we brought in a bunch of guys that we let go that we really like, tough guys, more or less going to be special teamers, guys that you develop from the bottom up, not from the top down. But it was good chemistry. All of a sudden, those guys melded in with what we had, and we went 8-3, running the football. We had John Riggins, we weren't using him like we should have before that. And we started using John, wearing him out, and that was the onset. We started using 2 tight ends. A lot of people weren't familiar with that concept, and running the ball very effectively. As a result, we had time of possession. We were very efficient in our offense, and it blended right well with the defense, and that's how we took off.
I just fell into the right place. It was Bobby being the general manager, and then him having Charlie Castley work for him. Mr. Cook, the town. I actually believe that the Redskins and now the Commanders, I think it's the greatest sports franchise in the world.
I had one of the world's greatest 30 jobs, and I want to say thanks to all of you for that. I have a Redskin family that I'll always be a part of. I think I'm one of the most blessed guys in the world.
This episode was narrated, produced, and researched by me, Hannah Lichtenstein, senior copywriter for the Washington Commanders. It was produced and edited by Jason Johnson. Executive producers are Rael Antine, Ryan Yoakum, and Kevin Klein. Graphics designed by Roman Schumann and Rakim Smith. Social media by Maggie Anchulis and Rebecca Solzbach. Alumni relations help comes from Tim Hightower and Caroline Decio. Thank you to our guests for their contributions, and thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe to Hail Tales to never miss an episode. And let us know your favorite Burgundy and Gold moments. Maybe we'll touch on them in Season 2.